Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dress and Drinks. My name is Leon Wiebers. I'm a professor of costume design at Loyola Marymount University. Very excited to have you join us again this evening, afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, or morning, for our program. I'm very excited to have with us our first archivist of commercial products, Catherine Acosta. She is the product archivist and brand historian for the iconic footwear company Vans, a VF company. Since joining Vans in 2018, she has created the brand's official archive at their headquarters in Costa Mesa, California, and collaborated on numerous projects related to the brand's history and cultural heritage. Previously, she was a teaching assistant at Parsons School of Design in New York City and a curatorial fellow at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, also in New York. She holds a master's degree in the history of design and curatorial studies from Parsons and a bachelor's degree in fine art from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Catherine, also a current resident of her hometown here in Alhambra, just outside of LA, bordering on the east side, and volunteers at the Alhambra Historical Society and the fabulous Gamble House, a National Historic Landmark and a California Historical Landmark located in the city of Pasadena. So it's great pleasure that I welcome Catherine here today. Catherine, please join us, and please welcome Catherine to the show. Thank you, Catherine, so much. I'm super excited. I love Vans shoes. I cannot wait to talk to
Oh, goody. Yes. Thank you for having me this afternoon or evening.
you. Depending on where you are, right? Uh,
Exactly. I'm still here at my office.
so you're down in Costa Mesa. Excellent. So am I. So what awesome. So why don't do you want to say anything about yourself before we dive in and start talking about Vans and the archive and other things?
Only to add that this past spring, I started teaching part-time at Chapman University, which is
Oh,
local to Orange County.
yeah.
Um, Teaching a class on style and dress that was developed by my friend, Professor Rachel Kinnard, who's also a Parsons alum. And she's on leave right now, and I came in to teach it. So juggling a full-time position at a company with that part-time teaching gig has been quite a very rewarding but challenging experience.
Yes, yes, it is. I mean, you essentially will have two jobs now.
Yes, temporarily.
Temporarily.
So
So,
I do hope to come back to Chapman maybe in the spring of 25 or fall. So.
oh, fantastic. Actually, we have a fashion club here at LMU, so maybe I'll have you up and you can talk with the fashion club about merchandising and brand management. We don't have a fashion major, but it would be great for you to talk with some of our students.
Yeah, well, sorry, the side note is that that's really interesting about Chapman is they don't have a formal program. This is within their like humanities school that's all about like sort of this cultural industry program. So my experience at Vans kind of gives this commercial aspect, the background and sort of decorative arts, design history, museum space also leans really well. And it's keeping me sharp on my toes in terms of talking very critically and theoretically about dress, fashion, race, and identity. So I love it. So
Awesome.
I have really three stories to share, but I think I'm going to focus on the first two. If there's time to get to the third one, it will be lovely, but not necessary. So building our archive, this is a really beautiful historic photograph that we have in our collection here at the company, dating from the early 1970s, showing an employee Christmas party with this lovely cake saying, "I'm a Van fan," which was a slogan that was used by a lot of our early salespeople and district managers and store managers when the company was really only located and operating in Southern California. Yeah, so just sort of kicking off a little bit of the background into my role and how it got developed here at Vans, and really setting the foundation for a company that had no preservation process in place or program or full-time archivist or anybody even doing anything close to what I was doing. This is a photo of me right when I got officially hired in 2019. And the background story as to how I kind of co-collaborated with Vans on this position was that I came in about a year before as an intern while I was finishing up graduate school in New York. very eager to get a full-time position somewhere and kind of walk in, which was ambitious but well worth it in my opinion. And coming from a very niche field of art history. And Vans at the time in 2018 had a really robust internship program across all departments here at the headquarters in Costa Mesa. And the design team, specifically within footwear, were very eager to kick off this archive project. So they were looking for someone specifically who had some experience working in archives and museums, but they didn't actually know what they were looking for. And it so happens that in the design team at the time, there were several Parsons alum, some of which were familiar with my master's program. So the invite got sent directly to my program. I applied. I'm from Southern California. At the time, my parents were still living here, so it seemed like a great opportunity. I took it for 2 months. They loved it. And then I basically went back to New York, finished school, and really walked with them hand in hand to create the full-time position. So when I graduated in May of 2019, I then stepped into my role at Vans, relocating out here in that summer. But just to give further context and explanation, though, is that it was about 9 months after I got officially hired that COVID happened. So
Oh,
the
wow.
immediately challenges have been faced. And in addition to that, since COVID and that time, there's just been a lot of changes and challenges here for the business at large. So I've survived through many changes and continue to be here and thrive and really build the business case and justification for building this archive. I don't have a beautiful space yet. The photos you're looking at are, one is a kind of mock-up fake archive photo that I did in a marketing storage closet. So that's really, and I like that because, it looks like I'm in this beautiful collections room, but really that's just marketing product behind me. I'm just holding old shoe boxes. But it really conveyed the idea to people here that, we could have this space. So the other image also shows one of my storage spaces out in one of our warehouse buildings that's been a little more developed, but it's really a work in progress right now. And I'm sitting in one of our conference rooms here. And the goal is that I will have a really lovely workspace and hopefully some proper storage space as well. But it's been a very slow process.
So I want to say, as we're moving to the next slide, Catherine, this is awesome. And there's so many of us in the world, that are at the forefront of starting collections or have collections that are in weird hidden spaces. Or not appropriate spaces. And so what you're experiencing is something many people have experienced who've been in our audience and are members of CSA and not all over the country, in terms of, okay, we have this historic house, what do we do with all these things? Or, so it's fascinating that you were also able to kind of create your own position. I mean, what a rare opportunity to really be able to help define what that is, and also to help such, a well-known global brand as Vans really begin to think about what an archive means for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that was why the opportunity was really exciting. And there is this sort of strategy, I would say I have, of kind of faking it till you make it. So making things look really beautiful and good. So you're going to see things. I work really closely with our in-house photographer who's become a really good friend and collaborator. And there's reasons to not just photographing our collections as I continue to build them, but it becomes content that we could use as the brand. So I'll be speaking about that too. And so this is an early image from, I think, December 2019, when I spoke here at our global town hall. At the time, we had about like 600 employees on campus all the time. Now it's a little more hybrid, so not as many people here. But this was just a quick mock-up of showing people some of the objects that I was inheriting on white in that like just clean museum style to really demonstrate the power and of collections and building this thing. And this was really a symbolic gesture to the brand. And this is our former president, Doug Palladini, and Steve Van Doren, who's the son of the lead co-founder of Vans, Paul Van Doren, who has since passed. And at the time, Steve has continued to work here pretty much his entire life since he was about 12 years old when the company was founded in '66. So the fact that, again, this is a symbolic gesture, and I'm holding one of the oldest known photos we have of Vans from the company's collections. And just to give some context too, is that I inherited a lot of items that had been stewarded by long-term employees, such as Steve, long-term designers, etc. And have since have like a modest small budget to buy stuff back too, which is more focused on projects that we're doing here from a marketing and product point of view, but not entirely. So, again, it's not like I walked into a place that had nothing, but it's a hunting and gathering and bringing stuff together. So literally from the ground up, as I'm sure some people in your space definitely know about.
And the organizing of it, and just like, okay, what is everything that you have? Because Vans is not just shoes, it has so many other things.
Yeah, we have a lot of memorabilia. We do have an apparel collection. That has not been the biggest priority for me to get to, but Vans has been operating an apparel business going back to the 80s and 90s. And then when VF, our current owner, purchased the brand in 2004, VF at the time owned Wrangler and Lee Jeans, and a couple other brands. Our sister brands are the North Face, Timberland, Dickies. Dickies got acquired right before I got hired. And so we have it in VF's DNA to do that work, and they're very aware. So Vans apparel business has really grown in the last 20 years now that they've owned the company.
Mm,
So this is just an image to show that COVID moment and the flexibility. I would say that the way that this archive has been going has been being extremely agile and flexible in terms of really listening to what the company needs. And one of the things that I leaned into, which was also really understanding what my strength was in this role for the brand and what was needed, was that, was really doing storytelling work. And so during COVID, the company created this 24-hour content channel online called Vans Channel 66, getting content live from New York City, Mexico City, Los Angeles, and maybe one other place. And we were constantly showing DJs, bands. We invited people to come and do their own content. And Steve had a variety show that was once a quarter, and I had a 30-minute segment, which we're seeing a photo of here, talking about things from the archive. And this was kind of the beginning moment of, I think, me recognizing that this was really valuable, also really forging a really great relationship with Steve and being a steward of his legacy here at the brand. So since then, this was already a couple years ago, I've kind of built off of kind of signing my rights away to the company to do that kind of work for them. So I'd say I'm in this really hybrid role of being part ambassador now, and this was kind of the beginning moment. But it's rightly so to give voice and also show visibility to the archive that is very hard for people to see if we don't have it beautifully organized and a space for them to see it.
yeah, exactly. Um, and I imagine that, I mean, as you're building this and trying to do it, it's also, you're not really open for people to come and do research in or to do scholarship in. So there's also some level of, I don't know, privacy, secrecy.
I would say privacy, and that's just, I mean, as you know, a lot of business archives aren't necessarily open to the public. It's a case by case basis. I mean, they are open to researchers and stuff, but again, case by case, and everyone has their own policies. I don't have a formal policy at this time, just because there's so many other priorities. And so the answer is really no. But I do help out private collectors when they hit me up. A lot of them, the real big Vans fans, know I exist, so I try to do my best in terms of forging relationships and helping them when I can. If they ask me if I know when is this from or that kind of stuff. But and I do function like actually this morning I gave a quick sort of tour. I sort of brought a bunch of stuff on my cart to a conference room to speak to a collaborator, a small skate shop from Baltimore who's working with us right now, to give them just kind of a quick like highlights of the collection. So I do I'm trying to function to that ability to show people stuff when I can. And so I actually sit in marketing, and that is a recent move. And so here's kind of just some images to speak to some of the marketing work I've done and also the value it really provides to the brand. This is from a couple of years ago when we had this product franchise called the Anaheim Factory. It was started long before I got here. Anaheim Factory is an homage to our first location in Anaheim, California. We had a factory operating until the early 1980s. Vans is unique as a footwear manufacturer because they were rooted in manufacturing and they owned and operated their own companies through the mid 90s. that were here in Southern California before they moved overseas. So we were one of the longest standing American like vulcanized footwear companies that was made in USA for a long time. This product franchise kind of went through a lot of different phases, but there was an ask from our Europe team to really kind of clean it up and make it really focus on the heritage. So I worked really closely with the marketing team there to redo the copy, kind of create almost like a little bit of a style guide for the way that the copy should be. And then this is an example of Anaheim product shoe that was designed without my consultation, but was based on the image that you see me holding there. So this photo was taken after the shoe was released. And I use this as a great example. This is how I've now, at the time I was living in our product team, but I used this frequently at our corporate headquarters to demonstrate, had I known, we could have tied back a beautiful story. This shoe was a custom shoe in the brochure, and it likely wasn't blue, it was probably red, but nonetheless, recreating that historic print that we have a historic image of, there's opportunity for storytelling there, and we weren't able to do that. And so this was kind of like a really early example of me. This is from like 3 years ago of really trying to be like, hey, if you bring me in early and we work together, we can make these connections and fuller storytelling.
What a great pattern, though.
It is, yeah. And so here's just another image of what the toolkit for that collection looked like. This was like a big opportunity for me. This was one of the first big marketing projects I worked on before I was sitting on the global marketing team. So this was, really, again, consulting. And I mean, I like writing, so I was not afraid to jump in. We only have one full-time copywriter here at the brand, so being able to assist and take ownership of it, it also makes it feel more special to me too. And knowing, setting also the tone for how this stuff comes off. So I'm not doing any of this actively right now with any of our product lines. I do chip in and chime in for copy if there is a historic story, but the goal is to get some more clearer heritage brand management strategy in place. And again, it really does take time.
So, how many objects do you have in your archive thus far? Do you know?
I had a rough inventory done, and we have several thousand, mostly footwear, probably around, I think the full total was around 5,000 or so. Footwear, memorabilia, apparel. By I say memorabilia, I mean also including some ephemera stuff, so photos, documents. Um, we have custom Fender guitars because we've done stuff with Fender. So the memorabilia piece is varied. We have random obviously skate decks that have been used for various projects. Some are historic, so I see things are in the discovery phase still. Because I'm still, and again, my priority the last 2 years hasn't been so much on the collections management because there's been so many challenges here for the business. It's been plugging myself into marketing work, which helps justify and explain and give funding for it. So this is another example. This is from already, I can't believe it, 2 years ago. But this was a store display we did here in downtown LA, and it was a part of a global brand campaign called Classic Since Forever. And I got to come in and help curate historic imagery from catalogs. We used a couple historic artifacts for the downtown LA display. And then most significantly was that the images you see there, especially on the left-hand corner of the skate highs with the duffel bag behind it, those are two items from the 1980s in our collections. And that's a photograph that I worked on with our photographer here and took. And so this is a great example of the justification for why we should have this, is that we don't have a lot of usable content that we own, that have rights to. So here it is if I photograph it, we own it and we get to use it and it's cleared. So this has been a big loophole, and I'm finding that this is a big sort of entry point into being like, hey, if we start photographing and are able to leverage our collections, this is becoming content that we can use. Same
Oh,
thing with the hat over there too. That's a hat that I have from the early 90s. So
the baseball cap hanging on the wall.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is really, really interesting, especially coming from a commercial perspective about, I think many ways we think that, oh, well, they've been doing this forever and they must have collections. But it's really, to my knowledge, in the last couple decades that And obviously, some commercial brands have longer standing archives, like couture houses, but more ready to wear places or athletic wear places, I think, are only jumping on that bandwagon, mostly because it seems like what I've talked with others about is now, as they're starting to do sort of the classic van or insert here or a throwback, whatever, they don't have the content or they don't have the objects. And so they're needing to reacquire them or look at them in some way. Is that something you're experiencing?
Yeah, yes, and I would argue too that Vans is very much an American heritage brand. Obviously, with its connection to skateboarding, I mean, we're probably one of the oldest skateboarding brands officially. You know, we were working with skaters and doing skate shoes in the 1970s when nobody else was paying attention to skateboarding from a brand level.
Mm,
And that's really where the richness of our cultural ties comes to. And I'm not going to probably get too much into that right now, but we there is a big ask to like provide that content and have it. And people are always shocked when they find out that, oh, I've only been here for a few years, or we don't, or like the company really didn't save anything. When they shut the factories down in the 90s, they auctioned off everything and they threw things away. There were long-term employees who,
oh, wow.
some of them are retiring and leaving, and they literally told me that, hey, I dumpster dived this. I saved it when it was in the dumpster, and it's like a spec sheet binder. So again, and that's like the general business mentality, right? We don't necessarily need to save or hold on to it. We're also making mass product and stuff that is not intended to be used forever, especially I would say Vans, which historically is known for everyday casual sneakers.
Hmm.
So there's really, and I think our attachment to skateboarding too has fostered a really a point of view that's just focused on the now.
Oh, yeah,
And
that makes sense.
because even though we are a heritage brand, and I would say that, and I think others would too, we are very strategic in not overusing or overplaying that heritage piece. We're very focused on the next generation and in the moment. So it's a little bit of a contentious thing. I sometimes will switch out the word heritage with legacy a bit too.
Well,
Um,
you actually bring up something that's really interesting. What do you, for members of the audience and others, I mean, how do you define heritage brand? What do you mean when you use that term?
I mean, I'm just referring to a company. I mean, for us, I say heritage because most of our inline styles and our classics business are defined by shoes that were designed over 40 years ago.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and that's also part of, if I may, Los Angeles culture. LA culture has always been the city in the world, really, of what is the next new thing. You know, you drive around the city and we're like, look, it's a house from the 1920s, and we're super excited. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there's a
find
lot
a
about
Victorian home and we're like, whoa, my God.
the romantic image of Southern California, post-war Southern California when the company started in the 60s, skateboarding, all of that has been really important to forming the context. And that's something I try to bring to the brand too, which um, wasn't really thought of over here consciously.
Well, and we were talking about this as we were prepping. There's something really interesting and akin to the idea of a mission statement that a museum collection might have, and your brand identity and your brand management, and how they are somewhat parallel objectives, excuse
Yeah, and so we have a new chief marketing officer who I report into, and so we've just sort of done a big brand refresh and have our new brand foundation out. And I've had drafts and sort of archive what the archive's mission statements are, but I've been waiting for us to really kind of pinpoint what the new brand foundation is because we've had so many transitions in marketing and leadership here to now kind of marry that and kind of take cues from that to inform what the archive is. I mean, obviously it's also separate too. So, I mean, I feel like I am more intent to model museum practice, and this is for the preservation of the culture, not so much the business per se, and leverage some of that more. But, I'm trying to kind of please both worlds and sides here and I like to joke that I'm the nonprofit sector of the brand. Because I'm a one-person team with not very little funding. So just to kind of give some insight to, again, so for the last since October, I've been working now officially in our global marketing team, reporting to our marketing leadership team, and this has really created a lot of more visibility for me and assisting with marketing storytelling. This is a project that I have going on right now. This is an installation that was up at our downtown LA Van store, honoring Anthony Van Engelen, who's one of our long-term athletes, skater here at the brand. And he just debuted his recent signature skate shoe, which was the most technically advanced design Van skate shoe. And part of the brand activation and launch of his shoe was doing this exhibit, which includes these two walls and two others, talking about the recent design history of his shoe. And so I
Oh,
got to work really closely with the design team, really procure most of this content from them, and also do some sort of contextual tie back to the 1970s when we started our first skate shoes, and specifically the old school, which is a shoe that's really influenced Van Engelen's signature models in the 2000s and the current model. And so this is no longer on view in downtown LA, but we're about to go to Shanghai and Seoul and take this activation there in 2 weeks. Um, and there's also big skate components.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, this is a big win. This is a really big recent win for me. Um, this is a close up.
Where in Seoul are you going to be putting this up?
It's going to be at a small gallery.
Ooh.
I'm not sure what the neighborhood is, but it's going to be at a small gallery that's sort of kitty corner to the FA store, which is the streetwear skate brand Fucking Awesome, also known as FA, which is Anthony Van Engelen's one of the co-owners. So they have a really nice flagship store in Seoul, and we'll be right around the corner. This is the one piece of the exhibit that has the historic content, which includes one of our oldest pairs of the old school, seen there with the first ad of it. And then just a fun note too, because Anthony's from Southern California, is that small little kid photo right there in the corner. That's a photo of him from about 1980, 81, when he's about 2 or 3 years old wearing Vans.
That's
So it's a
adorable.
cool, it's a beautiful story. Like it's, and it's special. Like not all our athletes are from here. And we also, again, this is us sort of, doing these, like, a lot of brands are doing these kind of installation and museum like exhibits. So this is us obviously taking cues and inspiration from that. But also, I think with my background, like, for example, I took full ownership and co-collaborated with our copywriter on this copy. And we wanted it to be really good when there were people saying, no one's going to read the copy. No one's going to read that. I was like, no, 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 no. It doesn't matter. Someone is going to read it and it better be tight. And it basically, we got to write this beautiful essay about Anthony's career and his signature models. And also just showcasing too that the archive is stewarding their legacies in skateboarding, athletes such as Anthony. And also that we get to also hold things that are of recent history. So this wall shows 5 skated FA decks from him that he saved, which there's some controversy around, do you display skate decks as art or not, but we did it here. That's a skateboarding conversation. Purists would be like, no, it's not art. It's a usable functional object. Why would you put it on a wall? But they look really cool when they're worn and used, and they're from the athlete. And then in those cases below are 3 worn and wear-tested pairs of his signature model. The one closest to us in the view is the one that he wore, and the other 2 are worn by 2 younger skateboarders on our skate team. So it's really cool. The skate nerds really liked it, and general people that got to see it. So
Yeah,
um,
that's super cool. I'm sure Marcel Duchamp also felt the same way or had the same critique when he hung a urinal from the wall.
sure, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so we had a big event activation, and I got to moderate a panel. That's Ave Anthony himself right there holding his signature model. Next to him, reaching for the mic, is Neil Shoemaker, who is the lead designer that worked with him. And I just showed this image in here because the really other important thing for me in working with Vans is that, skateboarding is a big ecosystem. There's different aspects to it. There's really mainstream components of skateboarding, but then there's really core components that really, really are subcultural and have these sort of cultural ties that, yes, not everybody's going to get it or everybody cares. And so being really invited in this space by Vans, this was really a targeted event for skate media and VIPs. It opened up to the public later in the night, but this panel part, And being able to really speak to someone who in the skate world as Anthony is truly legendary and has a really incredible athlete and career. And he won the highest award you could get in skateboarding, Skater of the Year in 2015. He's had multiple signature models with Vans. He's been on the brand for 19 years. And so as a woman who's not a skateboarder and being involved in this project, it was really, really an honor to do it. And I lean in so much to my own background as a teenager growing up in LA who was really involved in the punk and hardcore scene and understanding the nuance and meaning of subculture. And that is really, really, I feel like helped stewarded a little bit of credibility in getting into the space, which there's academics working in skateboarding for sure and speaking about it, and it's becoming more inclusive than it was. But historically, skateboarding hasn't been that way. So it really does it feels really great to, kind of be pioneering that space from this other point of view that you wouldn't necessarily see there.
Oh yeah, that's cool. It looks like you're having a great time here as well.
Yeah, I got everybody excited. I got him to sign the shoe that night for the archive, which was a big deal.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And then we had a skate event outside. And then I'm going to go to the next slides because I'm going to jump into the other collection stuff I wanted to speak to.
Sneaker
Yeah,
stitcher.
this has been one of my really big research projects here at the brand. If people have heard me speak before, they might have seen me. I've shared some of this content through my Instagram. I've spoken about it before, but I can't stress how valuable and important it is. So this is one of the oldest known photos of the inside of a Vans store. This is from the first store at 704 East Broadway in Anaheim, California, taken in 1968. And this photo, as cited here in the credit, is from the City of Anaheim's Public Library, their archives and collections. And this is a photo that I found pretty quickly after I got hired because it was printed in black and white in a small history book on the City of Anaheim, written by a local historian and also city council person in Anaheim. I was very eager to track down the source of that photo, and I didn't even know it was in color until I went to the collections. And it took a while because this was during COVID, so they weren't open. And the archivist there, it just took her a minute to get back to me and organize a trip. And I connected with the Anaheim Historical Society, who brought me in. And Stephen Fassler is his name, the author of the book and the city council person. And he met me, and they had it in color. And she was able to get me the citation too. And this is the oldest known photograph we have of the inside of that store, which was the first Vans store ever. But what's really special and profound, and she's an unknown store manager. To this day, I haven't been able to find anyone who can identify her. So if anybody knows, please let me know. But what's special is that she's holding a custom-made, one-of-a-kind Style 17 Vans shoe. And the Style 17 was a shoe silhouette Vans made only for a few years in the 1960s. It had a classic pointy toe. So if you're familiar with women's fashion or sneakers for women in the late 50s and early 60s, that was a pretty typical silhouette. Vans shifted away from it by the early 70s, and we continued to make product designed specifically for women, but it didn't have that pointy toe. And what's really special is not just the silhouette, but that these are all custom made with fabric. And so one of the big early business innovations at Vans, because they were their own manufacturer and direct-to-consumer retailer, was that they offered customers the ability to bring their own fabrics to the store, and then you could have a pair of custom shoes made. So you literally can find one-of-a-kind shoes. And if you speak to people who grew up in Southern California in the 70s or were here and remember going shopping at Vans, a lot of them give these great anecdotal stories of being like, oh yeah, I got my custom pairs of Vans here. And I have other imagery that shows us advertising it in the late 60s as making matching shoes for drill teams at high schools, marching bands. So it really was a big, small phenomenon happening here. And the other great sort of anecdotal story is that Pendleton has a pair in their collection that also dates from the late 60s of custom Vans, because apparently at Disneyland, which would have been down the street from the store in Anaheim, in Frontierland at Disneyland in the 1960s, there was a store selling Pendleton fabric and items, and that included Pendleton was getting custom-made Vans shoes with Pendleton fabric. And their archives have an anecdote from oral history from a long-term employee saying that I've been in touch with Disney people, but I haven't gone over to really do the digging to see if they have any documentation. But at Pendleton's headquarters up in Oregon, they actually have an example of this shoe. And it
Oh,
has Pendleton flannel and the earliest known Vans like heel tab and branding on the shoe. So this customs business was huge. So finding this photo was really giving a lot of more insight and clarity about how big it was. Just the fact alone that it was a promotional one used in a city brochure with her holding it.
how much was a custom pair of shoes back in 1968 from Vans?
It's like $2, $2.49, $3.49. And
Oh,
so the customs
that's
phenomenon is something that we
amazing.
still do today. Yeah, yeah, it's great, and I think it's one of those facts that the goal is that we're leveraging it more and more and more and taking ownership of it because custom sneakers is a big thing in so many other spaces. But Vans has literally been doing it since the 60s. But the beauty, an interesting thing is that it was really a phenomenon that began with women. So the image you're seeing here is a wonderful pair of custom Vans that I've acquired for us that also dates to the late 1960s, 67 to 69, and it's that style 17, that pointed toe silhouette. And if you look inside there in the branding, that's some of the earliest known branding on our shoes. It actually has an old logo that says it was styled by House of Vans. Someone coined the name House of Vans for our retail stores in the late 60s through the mid 70s. And then very slowly throughout the 70s, the brand started transitioning and referring to the stores as just Van tennis shoes, Vans. And by the end of the 70s, it's definitely dead set on Vans. But there's a transitional moment, and House of Vans was the original name for the stores. Which also I feel like has some couture connections to it. No documentation on it, but I kind of have speculating. If you look at the logo, it's talking about how it's a piece of fabric with scissors and like a needle and thread. So someone
Oh,
is
yeah,
very
see
aware
that.
of, yeah, again, speculation, no formal, but I feel like someone was taking cues from fashion at this time. So this is a wonderful pair in our collection. They're in pristine condition. And again, truly one of a kind.
Oh my gosh, those are so sweet.
So yeah, showing those alongside a pair from the mid 1970s. Um, and again, collectors have known about the custom Vans for a long time. It's still a practice we do today. We have a customs app online where you can order them. But up and through the 90s, when we had those factories here in Southern California, you could really kind of do whatever you want. And so we also did a lot of one-off promotional shoes over the years, again, with no documentation. So when you find something or someone tells you, you're like, oh, cool, I didn't know that, but that makes sense. Like anything is kind of possible.
Wait, so when you say one-off promotional shoes, do you literally mean like you would do one shoe out of a pair or a pair of shoes that were promotional?
So you could do a lot of different things. So when I say promotional, like, because we still do this to a certain degree, like, a local radio station wants 100 pairs of shoes with their logo on it. Vans would do that. We
Gotcha.
did a lot. I've found a lot of, and not just for companies, but also like local high schools. We did marching band shoes for USC in the 70s. They weren't sneakers; they were actually leather shoes, but those come up. So again, the capabilities and the possibilities that they were doing were just ongoing. Oingo Boingo shoes in the 80s. I found those.
Oh my
When
God,
we,
really? Of the
yeah. So I
band?
mean,
Seriously?
the
Oh my God.
bands.
I want
That was a
pictures of
real,
that. I
yeah, that was a
totally,
real obscure one.
I so want pictures of Oingo Boingo shoes.
Uh, I'll make sure I get those because they're I haven't had them professionally photographed, but they're really cool. But we did like licensed shoes with MASH. We've worked consistently over the decades with Disney too and Knott's Berry Farm. So again, that licensed collaboration phenomenon. But again, we would do the smallest thing like for a local high school or a radio station. Um, so there's a lot. This is just a photo that I have from, this is the mid 1970s. This photo, it's of, I'm forgetting which store this was, but one of our Southern California stores, unknown retail employee there. But what you can see is that matching bucket bag and the shoes. So another phenomenon playing off of this customs business was that we were making matching shoes and these purses And I also have Super 8 footage from the late 60s showing the inside of multiple stores here in California that show a lot of these on display in the stores. So dating about 7, 8 years earlier than this photo. And so this was a consistent thing that they were marketing, very grassroots. We didn't have formal marketing in the 70s. It wasn't until the late 70s when we introduced our first skate shoes that we started to get national acclaim. We took out our first big national ads in skate magazines. And then by the early 80s, we were really expanding globally. We started doing more wholesale by the end of the 70s. So this is still at a time when it really was a mom and pop business in Southern California. Um, and this is just one of the photos I have that show this purse and shoe combo, which I'm eagerly looking for our collection.
Those are great.
So this is an early brochure from the early 1970s, about 1973-74. This was a brochure that we had a digital copy of here when I got hired, but I was never able to track down a physical copy. And then this ties into a really great story, but this was donated to us by a woman whose mother had bought custom vans at this in the early 70s. And the interesting thing was that her mother actually lived in New Jersey, but had this brochure and would place custom orders. And you can see her mother's notes about how much the bag cost, $6.99, $7.49 for shoes, and that you needed a half yard for the shoes and a yard and 45 inches for the bag. And so even having those little notes there just demonstrated that people were doing this. And her mother was part of a tennis club where she was in New Jersey. So presumably, again, being one of the US manufacturer and then doing this custom shoes, word got around and we had some visibility to other parts outside of California. Also tying back to Anaheim, the company also really marketed itself in those early years as a family company, shoes for the entire family. So you see that reflected in the other panel there. But the one panel about the custom made matchmakers really shows how important that custom made business was for us. And this gets really overlooked because of skateboarding and our very close intrinsic relationship with that. And so here is the woman, Sherelle. Sherelle is the name of the mother of the woman who donated this back. Forgive me, I'm forgetting her first name, the daughter. But she was the one that provided this brochure to us and her mom's matching pair of shoes. And her mom had the matching vest. And supposedly her mom also had a matching bucket handbag made that she no longer had. And so this also was the first time that we at the company, to my knowledge, were able to get this back, have Sherelle's story. She wrote a nice little bio about her mother, who had a very interesting life and was very fashion forward, making her own clothes. She also had it donate another pair of of Vans from this time period made with like a fuzzy leopard fabric, which is super cool and predates any known leopard printed sneaker I've ever seen, because they're from like 73, 74.
Oh, wow.
So this story has been one, again, I leveraged so much here at the brand to show that this was a really important thing. We're giving insight to the space of women in sneakers, not related to athleticism, and showing that the influence of fashion was there too to also spearhead and direct sort of creative vision for women. The one last thing to sort of highlight is that through that customs business was sometime in the 1970s during the sort of like craft revival. Everyone's doing all these crafts for leisure time. Needlepoint's a really big trend. It had been for a while. Women were submitting their needlepoint to the company to make into these custom shoes. And when I got here, we had a couple pairs that designers had held on to, but nobody really knew the context to how these things were being made. Steve Van Doren himself just recalled that it was really tricky for the factory to assemble these. They had to back them immediately to canvas and ensure that, they were assembled really delicately to not tear or ruin the needlework itself. But one of the interesting things was that I started to pay attention to them. I saw that they came up frequently secondhand on eBay, Etsy, etc., and that the patterns would repeat. So I was like, someone's making a kit. Who's making these kits? Because I see the ladybugs, there's flowers, and they're the same ones. And these are all truly one of a kind and handmade. Some have initials. I've seen some patterns that I haven't seen repeated. So I've accumulated quite a bit of these.
Oh my
You can see I
God.
have a lot.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
they're beautiful. even this nautical theme men's one.
Wow, that's amazing.
I was going to talk about boat shoes, but yeah. And so through the last few years of being here, I've been able to uncover that it was something that Vans wasn't marketing overtly, but at local craft stores across the US. And this is a mention from a sneaker book published in the late 1970s talking about Vans custom business. And here is an editorial I found in a Florida newspaper showing the needlepoint kit with the shoe, but there's no mention of Vans in here. And so this was the confirmation I had to be like, okay, there are kits. And craft stores across the country were putting these kits, someone was assembling these kits and putting them together and they're selling them. And then they're mailing in the uppers to Vans who puts them into a shoe and they mail them back to you.
To a company in California.
Yeah. There's one final photograph that's going to bring it all together. This one.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's taken me, I would say, about 4 or 5 years now, but I finally found the kit online. And I believe Candy's was located here. I haven't had the bandwidth to really do the research about the store, but I bought several of these online of unused kits. You can see the pattern reflected in the pair that I already had. The two other kits, one was open. So what's really interesting is that inside of the kit, there's a typed up sheet for instructions on how to mail them back to the Van Dorn Rubber Company in Anaheim, California. And on the back of it is a list of all 50 stores in Southern California at that time. And
Wow.
Vance didn't, I mean, Steve Van Doren, he hadn't even really like, he didn't really know, you know, he was a young man at the time. There were other people here, but we didn't have any formal documentation about this. So kind of have a much fuller, clearer story. And it obviously speaks to themes of, women and needlework and craft and all of that. And, I feel like also this is in the late 70s when you have the whole feminist art movement happening here in the United States. So there's a lot of work and discourse around that in that space. And I feel like this is sort of this pop culture phenomenon happening. And a lot of these shoes survive. I'm sure you could go online right now and find some, but they do tend to be pricey, and I wouldn't necessarily want to wear them because they don't look super comfortable.
Oh my God. You are blowing my mind. This is not at all where I thought you were going to take me on this Vans ride today. This is so amazing. So amazing. Thank you so much.
You're
Okay,
welcome. I'll end
question.
there.
We got, yes, okay. We definitely need to like get together here in SoCal. Um, okay, some questions from the audience. Which department is funding your archive, the archive?
So right now, organizationally, I sit in the global marketing team under
Cool.
brand management. Yeah.
Brent, is there any way for aspiring collection managers just starting out to be involved with the archives in a volunteer or an intern capacity?
Give me about almost 1 more year from now. I'm trying to work with our HR team to build up to getting an intern position here. Hopefully that'll be for next summer.
Okay, great, cool. Are you buying back vintage Vans products? If so, where are you looking?
I mean, I look everywhere. Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, I look on obviously online, all the sites. We also, prior to my role here, we worked with a lot of private collectors, so I have relationships with them. I buy from them. To be honest, part of the reason why I'm on Instagram is to create visibility around my role, kind of unofficially. It's not an official work or Vans archive account, but I get people who ask me and offer things, on there too. Sometimes people even call the headquarters here saying they have something. Flea markets, I've definitely, as a vintage and antique enthusiast outside of Vans, I'm frequently at flea markets and I keep an eye out for Vans.
Awesome. And one more question for you. These look like heads. Is that a coincidence?
No, not a coincidence. I mean, Keds is an older brand, and they are really the legitimate, like the first women's sneaker brand by all means. But the silhouettes themselves, I mean, a lot of the brands in the early 20th century and like post-war period, they're not innovating new silhouettes. They're just sort of refining and redoing tried and true silhouettes at the time. So there's also a lot of companies that don't exist anymore that had very similar shoes. The early years, Vans was known for the classic sort of deck shoe, boat shoe, which by all means could look like a Keds or like a low top, like PF Flyers and all that. But, it was I don't know who the first is, but there are a lot of brands out there back in the day.
So, another question. Did they let skaters just buy one shoe because they wore one out more than the other?
Yeah, they did. That's part of like the origin story. So because we own and operate our own factories, I mean, so we also like marketed that towards like amputees and people who only needed one shoe. Um, so you could do that back then.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So the are any of the original stores still in Anaheim? I mean, over the years, Disney has acquired a lot of Anaheim, and I'm wondering.
No, we don't own the first store and factory in Anaheim. You can go buy it, and the building is still more or less the same, but it's owned by a private company. I think Steve has gotten in there in recent years, but you general public can't get in. Um, the oldest and longest standing van store in the world is actually in the city of Alhambra, located at Garfield and Valley Boulevard. That's just a weird coincidence, by the way. I know I'm from there, but like I didn't know that. But we've been in operating in that store since 1967, 68.
Wow, that's
And we
amazing.
originally rented it, and we've owned the building for many years. And so I have a whole other story about that research because that was something too that had been rumored but not confirmed.
Yeah,
Um,
that's amazing. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an astonishing lesson in the history of vans, which I was not expecting. I really I love the needlepoint shoes. Who knew? That's really amazing. And just wonderful stuff. Thank you for sharing this.